Many of you probably know our presenter, Nancy Huffman. She is a member of our chapter, and she's going to talk to us tonight about nature journaling. She became a member of the Coastal Prairie chapter of Texas Master Naturalist in 2014, and then got smart, moved to the Hill Country, and joined us in 2018. She's served as president of the Kerrville chapter of the Native Plant Society of Texas for a couple of years, and has taught journaling for many years, including to the training class for the Lost Pines chapter of TMNs and Friends of the Fredericksburg Nature Center. Prior to moving here to Hunt, she taught art in Katy, Texas high school. Which high school? 3 of them. Okay. Yeah, they're up to like 12 high schools now. So yeah, big place. Yep. All right. So Nancy, come on up.
Okay, as you all know, I was a school teacher and we always taught art all the time, right? No, that doesn't happen. But I'm here tonight to tell you that because art is such an important way to teach, to learn, that's why I will say that it's the 4th R. You know, the original reading, writing, and arithmetic. Okay. Art is the 4th, okay? Even when I was teaching, you know, they used to have the STEM education, and I'm sure you've all heard of that kind of thing going on. While I was even teaching, they changed it to STEAM to include art because it is that important. Where I taught in Katy ISD, we had a STEAM building, and we would have art exhibits there and the whole works. So anyway, back in the olden days, we were talking about the early naturalist. They all journaled. Okay. So it's really an important thing that have kind of lost to the side. You know, we've forgotten about how we can learn using art. The Victorians and all the people before that, you know, we didn't have cameras. And even after we first got them, they still continued this, but it was part of the curriculum that they would teach in school. It was just assumed that your students learned drawing. It might have been very basic. It might have been rudimentary. You know, they weren't training them all to be artists, but they were still training them because of the importance in all of that. So I have to remember to change my slides. So as a master naturalist, what are you interested in? And by the way, this is the same presentation that I have given to the Lost Pines chapter as the kickoff session for the last 2 years, except for the part that I'm not asking you to draw tonight. Yeah, I had a little bit longer to do that. So anyway, the people that were taking this class were all starting. You know, this was their kickoff lesson in their master naturalist training. So when you come into it, think about what you're interested in. And even those of you who have been doing this for a number of years, maybe you never thought about how you could use art. Are you interested in citizen science? Probably a lot of you are. Maybe you just want to learn more about the natural world. Maybe, as Jeff said, you're documenting the nature that's on your personal property. There's all sorts of things you can do that you can use it for. Also, education, whether it's children, young children, or whether it's adults. It's a really good thing to use. And then, of course, there are some of us that are artists and use it for those purposes, but there's so much more than you can do with it. I just mentioned on here botanical illustration. Okay, when I was teaching school, some of the things that we would teach about different careers every year. And botanical illustration was one of the ones I thought, okay, I'm going to look that up. I was always interested in plants. So I looked that up and I learned some really interesting things about how botanical illustrators work. And we'll touch on that in a little bit. So what are your reasons maybe to keep a nature journal? Some of you may already do that, but you can use it for scientific study, for data collection, documentation, education, and of course, art, if you're a person like me. Some of the additional benefits, it's really easy and inexpensive You can do it anywhere, anytime. You can do it with anybody. You can do it with your young grandchildren. You can do it with your elderly parents. You can do it with anybody. And it's good family time, and it hopefully gets you off of your phone quite as much, especially if you're dealing with grandchildren. It's also just good for your mental health. Maybe it helps you meditate. I mean, we have a nature journaling group, and one of our members comes purely because it's a way to reduce her stress from her job. So it's good for so many things. Maybe you want to learn a little bit about learning to draw. And of course, it helps you get it out of your brain and down onto your paper. And there are so many studies that will tell you too that getting it out of your head and down onto paper, it helps facilitate your memory. It helps facilitate more learning. It's just good for you all around. So probably most people think that they need to learn to draw like this if they're going to do anything decent, right? A lot of you were probably scared off of art when you were children and never really tried it much since then. But you obviously don't have to draw like this to journal. This is a master artist, one of the few in the world that have ever been able to draw quite like this. So when I'm talking about your brain on paper, I'm going to show you two different artists here. The one on the right is John Muir, who I'm sure you all know about. Notice he's got sketches in his journal. He was doing that as he went. Because sometimes, they say the picture is worth 1,000 words. That's really true. There's a reason there's that saying. Okay, the guy on the left is John Muir Laws. And when I first heard of him, I thought maybe he was related, but he's not. His parents really enjoyed nature, and they named their son after John Muir. So anyway, John Muir was one of these kids that, was bouncing around all the time. They got him interested in journaling, and he never stopped. And now he does it professionally. He has a wonderful website, if you ever care to look it up, johnmuirlaws.com. And he has so much content on there, all the way from live sessions that he does. He has recorded sessions that you can look up any kind of theme, whether it's geology or plants or birds or you name it. He's got something on it. He has seminars every year where he's training people to be able to teach nature journaling. So he's not just about teaching directly, but also training the teachers, because that's a really important part to be able to have more of this going on. So types of journals that you might do. Of course, there's the artist sketchbook. That's where I started. But I have a good friend who does a travel diary. You can use it to garden. Have you ever tried maybe to record what you notice in your garden every year? And see, maybe the dates, the times, what you planted, all of those things, what really worked well, a way to document that rather than relying on your memory, because that's not always a good thing. Some of you are birders. Maybe you like weather. Maybe you like plants like me. Maybe you're into astronomy. There's just so many things that you could keep a journal about. Or maybe you're a generalist like Master Naturalist, and you just like everything and you just want to incorporate everything into your journal. So where I started, because I never really thought about nature journaling, even though I drew all my life, never really thought about it. But in thinking back on it, I really started at one point in my teaching career, and me and another art teacher won a travel grant, and our proposed project was in association with the biology department. And we were going to work with the biology department the next year when they got to plan adaptations. So when we traveled to Spain, we started doing all these drawings of plants, and we went into geology. We did all sorts of things too, but we were kind of focusing on plants for that reason. Never really thought of it as journaling at that time, but it was. Then the next year, I had students do projects, and we did some nature journaling. We went out with the environmental science classes, the advanced biology classes, and then all of ours, because our campus was right next to the outdoor learning center. So we went out there for the full day and just got to walk all around and notice all the different plants, and make note of the adaptations. My students probably did more of the sketching than the science students did, but they all sketched. And of course, they had worksheets. They had certain things that they were supposed to look for and all that. So after we were done, my art students did projects based on what we learned and, were creative with it as well. So that was also nature journaling, even though I didn't really think about it at that time. So when I first moved here, I was doing some painting and I decided I needed to learn more about birds because I didn't think that the first birds that I painted looked quite right. So I looked up diagrams online. This is another way to journal. Looked up diagrams online and I started just copying the diagrams because it taught me so much. Because just spending that time looking at it in depth and really thinking through how it worked really was extremely beneficial. So I made notes, I did lots of drawings, did all that kind of stuff. And I can guarantee that I learned so much that I'd never thought about learning before. So then COVID hit. So what was I going to do with my time? I needed to get out of the house. And like I was trying to document at least some of the things that I found in my backyard, it got me out of the house. So I had, when I was a master naturalist in the Katy area, we had a botanist teach us about plants, and we would meet once a month. And it was all great, but she knew everything already. And she had this book and she could thumb through it. She could tell you anything and everything, the Latin names, you name it, about every single plant. And we would walk around this park that we always took care of. And we learned so much. The next month when we came back, I'd forgotten it all. Maybe I learned a few basics, but I sure couldn't remember the Latin names. It just didn't stick at all. So when COVID hit, I decided I'm going to go out in my backyard and I'm going to look for all those little bitty things that I never really noticed before. And I'm going to try to figure out at least what plant families they're in. And you start comparing the different plants, and you learn all about the similarities, the characteristics that make each of these plants belong to the same group. And I was really surprised too that some of the ones, especially like the pea family that's so huge, there's all these different subfamilies to it. Same thing with asters. You wouldn't know by looking at it that some of these plants are related. So just by looking at them really closely, counting the stamens and the anthers and the petals and the sepals and all those parts of the plants, you really learn to see what ties them all together. And it was amazing just doing all this. I learned a lot more. And even though I may not can tell you what the Latin name is, I can at least generally narrow it down. And to me, that was a big win. So I liked doing that project. So at that point in time, I really started thinking a lot more about journaling. So now, through Native Plant Society, who I'm representing tonight, we have a nature journaling group. We actually have a session this Thursday, and it is still in the afternoon because, this is the kind of time of year you never know if it's going to be cold or if it's going to be hot in the morning. So we're still on afternoon schedule this week. In May, we always come the fourth Thursday of the month. Next month, we change to 9 to 11 because I can pretty well guarantee it's going to be hot next month. This month, I think we're probably pretty good. So anyway, we do all sorts of things. You can see all the way from pressed plants to small drawings, lots of notes, because some people are more naturally writers too. And even sometimes I have to force myself to write all those notes. I just tend to draw it all out. But by forcing myself to do the writing part of it too, I become more observant, which is what this is all about. Okay, so this is generally, if I were giving the presentation to the training class, this is where we'd stop and draw. And we would go through these different components that you answer questions about. And these is not my my invention. This is from John Muir Laws. So the first question is, what do you notice? And you can illustrate that with pictures. You can describe it with words and symbols. And even just as important, quantify it with numbers. Maybe you're a numbers person. Then the second question, there's 3 questions. What do you wonder? What questions does this, looking at whatever it is that you're studying, what does it bring to mind? You know, what question do you have about it that's unanswered? Maybe you can go look it up later, but to put those notes in your journal along with it. It's not just to make pretty pictures. And the last question is, what does it remind you of? And this is where you can go a little crazy. You know, maybe you compare a bug that you see to a car. You know, maybe you see some sort of a funny connection. And, you know, that's where the creativity really comes in. But this is all John Muir Laws. I just also wanted to point out, too, if you're here tonight, you would like a bookmark. It's got all these questions on it for you. Okay. So just going back just a step, I want to show you some of the most famous nature journalers that we have right here. I thought there was another one in between, but I guess not. Okay, Charles Darwin. Is he a great artist? No. But do these drawings tell you something? Does that illustrate some concepts maybe that he was thinking about? He, you know, on the right, he's studying the geological formations, and he's got how the rocks are uplifting and turning. He's labeling them. On the left, that's his tree of life that describes evolution in his brain. Okay, so just these simple little drawings that he had in his journals really informed all of his work. And of course, Leonardo da Vinci, who can forget him? He was a brilliant painter as well, but he was also a military engineer, an inventor, and he used his journals to help him think through all of these things. That's where some of his most brilliant inventions came from, and things that he foresaw 500 years in advance of the real invention, like helicopters and contact lenses and things like that. You know, he foresaw those just based on what he was observing in nature. And I dare say he did not have an art class. He worked as a goldsmith, I believe, at first, and then he worked for kings, but he didn't have an art education. Carl Linnaeus, known for binomial nomenclature. They're by no means stunning drawings. They're not like Leonardo da Vinci's, but they still capture the essence of what he was studying, and they helped him formulate his theories, his ideas, and helped to make it that information presentable. Carl Linnaeus. Here's one of my favorites. I learned about her through a book at the library, Maria Sibylla Merian. And she was born to a printmaker. That was her father. So she learned all of the skills that involved in printmaking, but she was also a watercolorist, because during that time when she was alive in the 1600s, I believe it was, women were not allowed to use oil paints, but they could watercolor. That was acceptable. So she became a brilliant watercolorist. She printed books, but that's not really what she's best known for. She was the one who she kept caterpillars, and she was the one who really discovered that the summer birds that they were thought of before, the butterflies, right? They came from caterpillars. Nobody really put all that together before her. So all her illustrations in there, you'll see that they have lots of insects and reptiles and all sorts of other creatures in there that are associated with the plants that she's illustrating as well. So she made a big contribution to science in her artwork. Harvey Cushing, he's a neurosurgeon. Also, I don't know if he was the father of scientific illustration, but he sure does it well, doesn't he? These are his drawings. There's a reason why medical illustration is a very high-paid career. It's very difficult, it's very tedious, but it really illustrates all these like anatomical things so much better than photography does. Photography, even though it was a great invention and we all use it all the time, it just doesn't do the same thing as well as art does. You know, to really be able to focus on things and simplify things. Sometimes simplification is what's needed to really bring these points. So some important things that you need to remember is we're always drawing what we see and not what we can't see. You know, you can't guess at it. We don't go for perfection or pretty pictures. And in a minute, I'll share some hacks with you too. We skip the drawing part, so we'll do that. It's not really important to finish it. Sometimes you only need to draw a small part of what you're seeing because, like, say, for petals on a flower, all the petals generally on most flowers look virtually the same from one plant. So it's not necessary to draw them all in detail. Drawing one is fine. You don't have to draw everything. You can edit, you can move things around, you can leave things out as necessary. Things will move depending on what you're drawing. That's why I like plants. They don't move around on me. The light's going to change too really fast on you. And never get wrapped up in too much detail. And you always draw quickly while you can observe it. Continue if it changes, but only as long as you can remember it. And you can always finish things up later with handy field guides, with computer diagrams and photographs and things like that. So we have all these tools to help us finish it up later. Okay, I mentioned that I would share a few hacks with you. And going back to the idea of the botanical illustrators, I want to share this with you real quick. When I was researching to teach my students about botanical illustrations as one of those career choices, I discovered that when the botanists bring the plants in, you know, they're taped down to paper, and the illustrator takes those, they go photocopy them, and then they trace them. That's what they do. Why do you think they'd do that? I mean, isn't that kind of anti what we think of as art? Why would they do that? To what? It's a lot faster. That's one thing. It's very expedient. Okay. It's a good use of your time, but there's other reasons too. It's definitely more accurate. Yes. Yeah. And that's the reason that they're doing it, is to be accurate. So that's a very important trait that they want in their drawings. So is it acceptable when you nature journal to trace things? Yes, it is. One of my favorite things to do. And I like to do that too, even though I was trained as an artist. I've drawn all my life. I still like to trace things like that because A, I'm more accurate, and B, it's a good use of my time, and I can move on to making notes and really looking at things rather than struggling for hours to draw something accurately. Why would I want to do that? So anyway, when you're nature journaling, it is totally acceptable. if it's say, like a leaf, it's real easy to trace it. Not everything is real easy to trace. So maybe you can make some little points and connect the dots. I mean, there's all sorts of things you can do like that. And if you come to nature journaling, we'll talk about more of those little techniques you can use to do that. So not everybody has a big ranch or, great arboretum, place like that, but you can go to all these other places, even just your backyard, parks, zoos, arboretums, just mentioned that, nature preserves, front or backyard. You can even do it inside your house. We've all got produce from HEB. You can draw things like that and learn a lot. You can draw some of the flowers that you've got growing around your house, even the plants inside. You can draw all sorts of things, collections that you have. Like I still have my collection of seashells. Love to draw things like that. So that's a great thing to draw as well. And then, like I was showing you earlier, drawing from the internet. Sometimes that's what you have. Maybe it's pouring down rain outside and you really just can't get out and do that. But you can certainly pull up some things like that on the internet and do that. You can look at field books, draw from there. So just what do you need? Honestly, you don't need much. All you need is a piece of paper. You need some sort of a pencil. I like to use, when I'm just going out and around, I like to use a mechanical pencil because I don't want to have to worry about finding a sharpener everywhere I go. But you may be different. I mean, number 2 pencils work great. You can use those the simplest, basic, elementary school type of paper. You can use loose scraps of paper, whatever you like. You don't have to have anything fancy. Paper is really the only thing I would recommend really maybe spending a little bit more on, just because poor quality paper tears up real easy. And if you're prone to erase like so many students are, especially when you're learning, it doesn't take a whole lot of erasing before maybe the paper starts tearing up and disintegrating. And if you like to try a little watercolor, which why not? It's always fun. You need a little bit better, heavier paper to take that. And speaking of watercolor, I'll show you some more of those in a second too. But there's all sorts of journals you can find at Hobby Lobby or Hometown Crafts or anything like that. And there's great places you can order things from too. Okay, mentioned watercolor. You can even use just simple, real basic school watercolors. The secret is you mix your colors. That takes a little bit of practice, but it's certainly fun to work with. You can get real fancy. You can buy expensive watercolor paints. I mean, you can go all the way from really cheap to really expensive, real easy, all up to you. They make these water brushes, and I do have some examples of all of these supplies I'm talking about up here in just a little bitty kit. They make a water brush that has a reservoir of water. And so all you have to do is kind of squeeze it at the end. And that way you don't have to carry a pail of water with you. So it makes it simpler. Other things you might need, whatever kind of media you're using, paper towels, clips, rubber bands, all sorts of things like that. It depends on where you're going, how long you're staying there. Do you need some sunscreen? Do you need some bug spray? Can't tell you how many times I wish I had some. Anyway, depends on what you're doing. And if you really want to get into it, just like birding, you can get some great binoculars. You can use loops if you're doing the real close up, magnifying glasses, bug glasses. If you're tearing the plants up to really look at and see what you're drawing from, you can take scalpels and work with that. There's just so many things to make it really fun. I really recommend diagrams too. Taking a print of a diagram with you is real helpful, especially when you're trying to come up with the words to describe like what a leaf looks like or something like that. I didn't know all these things, but the apexes of the leaves, the margins, the bases, they all have very specific words. And if you have a diagram with you, it really helps you out. And it also helps you become more observant because you know what to look for. So those are all good things. So when you go out into nature, the main important things, you don't want to leave anything behind. No trash or anything else. Take it all with you. Don't disturb any kind of wildlife or especially your subject. So you're to be observant, pay attention to where you're sitting. Something may come to join you. Certain things you can't collect, of course, like birds and feathers and nest. And unless there's like a ton of a certain kind of flower, I'd recommend just leaving it. Leave things where they are. Could be something that's more rare that you don't know about. If there's a million of them, I think you're safe to pick one and take it apart. So when you're outdoors, also make various observations. Make sure you note the date and the place, the time, the temperature, weather, what your first impressions are, wind, clouds, other plant life, animals that are around. Is there water? What's the soil like? Is there a sign of wildlife, of disturbance, insects, anything else? I mean, all those things go into your observations. It's not just about drawing your subject matter. You need to document more things about it. I do have a few examples of resources up here. Like I mentioned, John Muir Laws. He has a number of books. There's this general one. He has one on birds. He has one on teaching teachers to Nature Journal. Then I've got one on the Sierra Club Guide to Sketching Outdoors. And this one is another classic by Claire Walker Leslie, Keeping a Nature Journal. Those are the three main resources. And then I have examples up here too, where I started from. There's also some great online resources, especially when you're talking about working with children. The best one, I think, is put out by the California, make sure I get this right, Native Plant Society. And it's a fairly thick document. You can print it out, they share it freely. Opening the World Through Nature Journaling. I mean, we're all about education. Then there's How to Teach Nature Journaling on the far right. That is the John Muir Laws book. And what's great about his book especially is he has lesson plans. So if you're new to it and you want to help others learn, you can do that. And just to mention about that real quick, you know, you might think you have to be a good artist to teach nature journaling. You don't. All you have to be is one step ahead. I learned that as a teacher, actually, because I was teaching things that I didn't really know that much about. But as long as you know more than your students, you're good. So, because I was teaching ceramics. I don't know much about that, but I did know more than the students. There's different botanical journals that you can find online too. Some really nice examples of some various artists. One of my favorites name is Lara Call Gastinger. And what she does is she has a sketchbook, and each double page, each spread of pages is like 1 week. And this is called her perpetual journal. So she has a journal that's got 52 open spreadsheets. So what she does, and this is the great thing about this, is you don't have to feel like I've got to fill this all up this week, right? I can draw maybe one little thing in there and make some notes and all that. And then next year during that same week, I add to it. It might take me 10 years to fill up that book, and that's all right. By doing that, you're not only getting information about what was growing that week, what was happening that week, and you see changes from one year to the next. How did this year vary and differ from last year and the year before that? So it's a really nice way to do that. And I just wanted to share John Muir Law's website again real quick. Free video lesson content on there. Nature Journal Club, he has that available. He has free teacher resources, homeschooling resources, like maybe you know somebody who homeschools and needs some help with that. And he has live learning opportunities. There's so much that he offers and he shares, and he works off donations. And I think a few other things too, but donations. So here's a few examples of some of the other scientists that drew, all the way from Galileo, Teddy Roosevelt, Jane Goodall. Jane Goodall, by the way, has a nature journaling program called Roots and Shoots that I'm not quite sure where it is that this happens, but she has these classes going on where they teach young children about nature journaling and try to involve them with learning art and becoming more observant in whatever they do. So, and of course, Lewis and Clark, Marie Curie, all artists in their own right. So are there any questions? Y'all got the shortened version tonight. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Let me go back to John Muir Laws. Okay. The contents of the nature journal. Okay. So the first thing we would do would be to take our journals and I generally start everybody off with leaves. Like when I do my class, we start off with Spanish oak leaves and we talk about how they are similar, how they're different. I have everybody trace those leaves. We talk about how you can tell a white oak from a red oak, all those various things that, you can observe when you're looking at it. So that would be step one of what we would do. We might talk about the other aspects of the oak tree too, like the acorns and things like that you notice. Just depends on where we are, but that would be the first thing we'd do. Then we would, let me see, what was the second drawing? Oh, yeah. Then the second drawing we always do, and we had generally to do them with photographs because in a large setting, we just don't have everything we need to be outside. So we'd start with, say, maybe a photo of a flower and talk about how to draw it, sketching, using something like a blue pencil. And the reason for a blue pencil, because it keeps people from having to think that they've got to erase it if it's not perfect. So if you draw it with blue or some other color first, that helps that. And then we talked about comparing the center of the flower to a clock. When we draw the petals off of it, we compare that to a clock, the old timey clocks, the ones with hands, not the digital ones. So that might be a new concept for a younger child, but we compare it to that. So clockwise, counterclockwise, is it 2:00? Is it 1:30? What time is that petal? So we do things like that and talk about simplifying the different forms. So those are the two things that we draw in there. And of course they take up some time to do. So any other questions? Yes. Well, I do have some journals, and like I've got my perpetual journal, like I was just describing that the one artist. Oh, I'm sorry. How do you organize everything? Like like I'm talking about like drawings, or are you talking about art supplies or? Mhm. Okay, so how do you organize yourself and keep yourself motivated to draw? Okay, one of the best ways to keep yourself motivated is to do it with other people. Because if you're accountable to other people and join a group that's doing that, you're more likely to stick with it. That's one of the big things. Um, as far as having different sketchbooks and scraps of paper everywhere and all that, yeah, I've done all that too. So I don't know. You learn over time to be more organized, I guess. I'm sorry, I don't have a real good answer for that, Jim, because I tend to, yeah. I mean, I have different ones. Like I have this one that I use with the nature journaling club that we'll have on Thursday. I use that one for that. I use sometimes I use scraps of paper. I do all of this, is what I'm telling you. And sometimes I have different books because the paper's different. Like if I'm doing watercolor, I want something that will handle watercolor. If I tried to do watercolor in this book, it just warps my paper all over and tears it up. So if you want just one that works really well, maybe a mixed media paper, because you can use wet and dry media on it. So maybe that's a better way to organize. Just get one kind of paper that will take different media. So anyway, I want to invite anybody that wants to come on Thursday afternoon, 3 o'clock, come draw with us. And what we do is we just draw whatever happens to be growing at Riverside Nature Center that day. There's not an organized lesson. It's more of a facilitation thing. If you're new, I really go through the different hacks with you that you can use. Yes.
Question, Zoom. What is the very first step to get started if you have never done this before? I see so much yet cannot imagine recording, journaling it all.
Okay. Well, the very first step to do it is get some paper and a pencil. um, and like I said before, I really recommend joining a group because it's so much easier to stay on task and really learn more about it when you do that. Sometimes, we all have ideas. I'm going to do this, but you're doing it by yourself, and we find things like that difficult to do when it's something new that you're learning. We all have different ways that we learn things. And when you're with a group of people who's learning something new like that, it's really helpful because you bounce ideas off of each other and you see something really good that somebody else is trying, maybe a new media or a different way of drawing or something like that. So that's my main recommendation there. Join a group that's doing it. So, yes. Okay, what do you do with a student who expects everything to happen quickly and easily, well, I think they're going to see real quick that that doesn't happen that way. But starting out by tracing and things like that, that's a good way to have a what we would consider a better quality drawing more quickly. So using some hacks like that, because, okay, when I was teaching, students do get frustrated, obviously, just like adults do. And they've started this drawing at the beginning of the class. And by the time you get back to that student that's back there in that corner over there, their page is empty, but they obviously were drawing. It's just been erased. They've erased everything that they drew. So, I mean, you really have to encourage them that there are no really mistakes, that all those lines are valid. They're all searching lines. They used to have a name for that in the Renaissance called pentimento, because they didn't have erasers. So everything that they drew stayed there, even if it was a ghost image. So anyway, tracing. Yes. Okay, what do you say to the student who says they can't draw? Have them trace. Yeah. Yeah. Well, if sometimes you just have to also write and do things like that as well. But just give it a try and realize that it takes time. It takes time to do it. And it takes time to overcome that idea in your head that I can't do this. It really does. So tracing is real useful. I think we can all do that, even to start. Yes. Mhm. Yes, it really does work. It really does work. Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards is one of our classic art books. And in there, and this was something I always had with my Art 1 kids do at the beginning of the year, I would have them give them all a Picasso drawing, a line drawing, and they had to turn it upside down, and then they had to draw it. And it was amazing what they could do like that. And these were the Art 1 kids, the kids that came in there saying, I can't draw. I'm just in here because I need the credit to graduate. And that's that. So understand I can't draw. And they're scared. But they could do that. So that, things like that also help get through the fear a little bit more. Betty Edwards. Yes. Okay. Blending observation skills and drawing skills. The reason I think that drawing is so important in learning to observe is because it really makes you slow down so much so that you can observe things in greater detail. I know I'm guilty of taking photos and you just snap like 500 photos and then you never really look at them again. And you certainly don't look at them very deeply. But if you draw them, you have to look at them real deeply. So it's a way of training your brain to slow down and make those observations. So to me, they're kind of all one and the same. They work together. So any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. Very good. And Alice has a gift, right? And oh, chocolate is our gift. Yeah, great. And so, Alice, come back down here. Oh, stop sharing. Okay. All right, with the price of chocolate, that's a pretty good gift. So, yeah. All right. I think that is it for tonight, unless anybody have any comments or questions they'd like to throw in. No? All right. We'll see you next month or see you out in the volunteering world.